Hello everyone, welcome to this cast of Deer versus Fantasy. This is a single game taken out of a best of 3 that happened in the most recent IAM. This was in the offline qualifiers, the bracket stage, whatever you want to call it. And I heard it got kind of weird, so I really wanted to cast it as I was too busy casting some other series for IAM. I missed this one. I didn't cast any fantasy at all, because unfortunately he did get knocked out pretty early on in what was a very, very long tournament, but he always has some fun games. He has some weird builds, and certainly versus Protoss, that is even doubly so often, and we already see that as an SCV out on the map, so let's get the introductions done. In the bottom left is the red Terran. He is FanTaSy. And the top right, as the blue Protoss, we have Deer. Currently going for that Reaper wall off. You can get on Automaton. FanTaSy going for the proxy barracks. Question is he going to go for any further proxies? I mean, this has kind of been dying down a little bit as far as anyone who's been watching StarCraft 2, like GSL, for instance, in 2018. It's not as popular to proxy in general, much less to proxy like more than one building or every building, as we sometimes saw. But FanTaSy, as I was saying, just a little bit of a weirder player. He could have gone back to Brood War, or maybe that creativity wasn't as rewarded, or his play style wasn't as, you know, lined up to his vision of how he wanted to play Terran. But no, he brought it back to StarCraft 2 after his military service, and I think it's in large part because he finds that this style just works out better for him. Maybe as far as having fun goes. Again, he didn't actually end up making it that far into the tournament, but we do have a lot of amazing Korean Terrans, so it's always hard to distinguish yourself, I suppose. Now, the probe saw everything, right? Makes it obvious that it's going to be a proxy barracks, and then even stuck around and gets back in to see that there's no factory, so you start to assume there's also a proxy factory. This barracks wasn't just proxied, it was also lifted to the high ground, otherwise the Reaper wouldn't be able to come up here. Automaton actually, not a really good Reaper map, especially if your Protoss opponent's going to go ahead and wall off like this. So this was a big bamboozling from FanTaSy, and it got exactly what he wanted. 3 probes, plus I believe this one over here. The scouting probe did end up going down, so it missed the timing of the starports, which is more likely to be proxy than the factory. So maybe Deer's reading into this and being like, okay, literally proxying every single building. Maybe not. He did already have kind of a scary opener, you know, as I was saying, the proxies kind of died down. Protoss gotten better against what ended up being just mostly only proxy Reapers, with the starport coming a lot later. And, you know, they got kind of comfortable with a 1 base expand. And that's what Deer did, right? Sorry, 1 base expand doesn't make sense. The 1 gate expand, and while he does find the starport and the factory down here, he still has, you know, kind of a lack of units to cover all of his bases, literally both his bases, right? You have a ton of dead space here that Hellions could roam around, Liberators can come around in the dark space and kind of surprise you, and then you have a ton of space over here where it's really quite impossible to get a wall. And what is happening here? Well, speaking of the amount of bases that one should have in any given matchup, this is weird. Okay, so the Hellions are doing some damage, by the way. It's so difficult as a Protoss player to not have any damage taken with Hellions, because your units unfortunately aren't that fast when it comes to actual like attacking speed. But 5 probes pretty good. Now I lift all his buildings, but I mean he built a fusion core in proxy, you know, of course to hide it. Doesn't matter if it's proxied or not. And then I assume that's going to be for battle cruisers, as Liberator range would take a long, well, I mean battle cruisers take a long time to get to. And then he also built 2 more barracks back at home. He's entirely on 1 base here, and while, you know, eventually command centers can go ahead and just lift and go to the natural base, I mean, that's not exactly an ideal scenario. Medevac was produced on that starport before it was forced to lift off, and this Hellion and Reaper combo, not even plural, and we're doing quite a bit of damage to the probes. So, you know, next time a Hellion possibly pops in, or in this case a battle cruiser, then that could maybe do a lot more damage. I mean, battle cruisers already kill probes pretty quickly, but... Uh-oh. Whoa, that was a mistake. Should not have had that supply depot down. I'm very surprised it is supply depot down, but I guess that was to let the SCV out. Luckily, the bunker was very close to finishing, and that will hold against a very few amount of units. 8 SV still went down, and again, 1 base economy here for FanTaSy. Deer, at least when he loses probes, he can rebuild them. He has the money. He also has the speed with Chrono. So he's up to 33, but that's going to change just a hot second here. Is once again a simple medevac drop. Ends up dealing a ton of damage, but doesn't actually get a lot of the kill shots. So only 2 probes go down, but, you know, lining them up for later. And right now, Deer, I mean, he's gotten the full vision of this main base. He's figuring, okay, I guess you're still in proxy. Maybe a Liberator will pop up, something like that, right? Which is why the Stalker's on patrol. But a Stalker will not deal with a battle cruiser, I can tell you that much. And, I mean, it's going to be like a base race? I mean, what... The Warp Prism is just something that FanTaSy really can't deal with. Even if he had a large number of Marines, he's going to be without Sim for a very long time. I don't even know if his intention was to get the Sim. It'd be very hard to call what his actual plan was with this build, but okay. Battlecruiser reveals itself, does not even really that much damage, unfortunately. The probes are pulled instantly away, and while the Battlecruiser will deal with this Warp Prism, it'll deal with even the 4 or 5 Stalkers, technically. It won't deal with them super well. Stalkers are actually very effective against battlecruisers, and if as long as you can afford to make Stalkers, you know, your entire economy isn't killed, eventually your output, your production of the Protoss player actually beats the Terran player, which isn't really what you usually say. Maybe if it's like Charge Lot Archon or something like that, when you're kind of getting cheaper units and you can split your minerals to gas, right? But usually if you're Stalker based for the initial time, you're too busy trying to get up other stuff and a third base, and, you know, it's up against the bio off of 3 barracks. It's a lot cheaper. But when it's battlecruisers, the amount of Stalkers will actually beat out the amount of battlecruisers you can get, even if you went into something like really silly, like a double starport from here, which I don't think you could afford. Because it's quite expensive, and for what they do against Protoss, I don't think they're ever worth it. You know, the reason we saw battlecruisers kind of come back into play was primarily because of their anti-Zerg properties. You know, it was quite abusive for a while there, but even that's really died off. So to see battlecruisers against Protoss is just, it's something that only FanTaSy would do. And, you know, I'm talking about the direct fight here, but that's not what you want to do with the battlecruiser, of course. So we see FanTaSy trying to really out-micro Deer. He's also pushing with the Marine Force, which again doesn't have any upgrades, not even combat shields, which sometimes you see them kind of sneak in there. But the economy has been absolutely ruined. FanTaSy, who tried remaking them and then gave up on that idea when the Warp Prism attack happened. So he's been down at 13 with a single mule. Single tank is very effective. I mean, I can see how the combination could work out, to be honest. And that's kind of the cool thing, is that if everything went according to plan for FanTaSy, he has tanks with enough Marine buffer that even if Deer had blink and he could blink on the tanks, it'd be a big sacrifice. And tanks do especially well against Stalkers, which are of course we're going to make against battlecruisers. Like, I see the idea, but because Deer, I guess, actually applied some pressure here, it's really messed up FanTaSy's game plan. And there we have just the sheer amount of Stalkers, like I was talking about, kind of beating out what FanTaSy can afford, both because he lost so many SCVs and because he went to battlecruisers. You know, these were, you know, 1 or 2 Liberators that are being microed really well. They could probably have done even more economic damage than the battlecruisers, but at, you know, half the cost. Warp Prism is going to come back here and just make sure the economy is just absolutely nothing for FanTaSy. He'd have to lift the command center eventually if he's nothing to defend against this, and he's not even producing right now, just a single medevac off that starport. He has sieged up the gateway, and now he's up to 3 tanks. Really prioritizing those tanks, noticing just how Stalker heavy that army is. But, yeah, geez. The idea here is actually, it's like, this could be so potent, right? Especially if you face a player who's just like, what the hell is going on? But Deer kind of kept his cool and didn't get too greedy. He didn't go not greedy enough, so he didn't have enough economy. I think he's got this, but remember, he doesn't have any upgrades. The same way that FanTaSy doesn't. He doesn't have blink, he doesn't have charge, and the amount of Stalkers here is impressive. They don't have that well good of a concave. So 4 tanks ended up just obliterating them. 1 went down along with the battlecruiser, but this is the real clutch moment here. FanTaSy did not even lift his command center. He's entirely all in. It would have been better just to pull the SCVs when he had the chance if he was going to plan on doing this, but missing that opportunity. where it's a little bit more buffer and also a little bit more repair on the battlecruiser could have been absolutely huge, but it is coming down to just the production, any production whatsoever of the Protoss player versus what the Terran has left over. And there are some chunky units, but Stalkers actually deal well with these types of units when they're not protected by very much. And even here comes a War Prison that help out with a micro a little bit. And without any more protection, the tanks go down to the surround, plus the battlecruiser is short to follow, and FanTaSy's weird-ass build is not going to work out here. GG. And I believe Deer did end up taking the entire series off of this, so I mean, good. More power to FanTaSy for trying to push the limits of Terran, especially versus Protoss, where a lot of Terrans are struggling. But Deer did have a particularly good IEM run, I believe, and you know, maybe he just was feeling good that day. But maybe that also isn't exactly a build you guys would want to copy. But if you want to have fun in StarCraft, then I think that's exactly the type of build you should copy. Anyways, thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this mess as much as I did, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.